All right, guys. How you doing? Haven't done a solo stream in a while. Is anyone in chat? Cool. Tricky Woo, you're there. All right, there's 18 of you. Well, gonna give it a little bit of time as everyone trickles in. This has been a weird day for me. Weird week and a half, really, on the internet and personally. And so I'm gonna start this off with a few caveats. So some of this drama pertains, to a doxing. And so I've blocked the guy's name in chat. Mods, if you see anyone, referring to it obliquely, nuke it from orbit, because I'm not going to mention it. If you really want to find it out, I guess you can super sleuth your way to find it. But I'm not adding to it one way or another. And I, as you guys know, rule this channel with an iron fist. The other thing, and I don't know, this is a little bit difficult to talk about, is that this makes me incredibly angry when I'm going to talk about. And I try to stay relatively even-keeled, both in life and on this channel, because I feel like a lot of emotion on the internet is performative, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to not. I'm definitely not going to ham this up for the camera. I'm not like trying to make something out of this, but there's a point in this. And so I'm probably going to go on a rant, like really a rant. And so really what I want to talk about, and I've alluded to this multiple times, is quote unquote good conservatives. So in the thumbnail, right, you see two people there. You see David French and Rod Dreher. And I was going to do an article reading at first. First, actually, I had a David French article saved that I still might do. Who knows? But then this whole Rod Dreher thing happened. And I'll give you guys a pretty general account, because, again, I don't want to involve any names in this. But essentially, a guy connected to the Christian nationalist sphere, connected with Stephen Wolfe, I believe, is the guy who wrote Christian Nationalism. I can't remember. A guy connected with him got doxxed by some quote-unquote conservative Christians, the kind that really, really care. And I've been following this on my Twitter. If you really have the need of it, you can go down my Twitter and, see the people involved in it. They got this guy fired. This guy had, 4 children. He had a career. He was, by all accounts, fine in his job, a pillar of the community. But he had bad opinions. He was a racist, an anti-Semite, a sexist, all of these things. And of course, even though it didn't affect his job, he this was all anonymous. He didn't want it connected to his work. He deliberately tried to separate it, but because he was associated with people they didn't like, these alleged Christians, they went out of their way to destroy him. And that's bad enough, right? These people are scum. And I'm going to get into it exactly, why they're scum and how much the way that we ought to treat and react to such people. But then Rod Dreher, a longtime pundit on the right, someone who's been incredibly influential to people in our circles, myself included, he doubles down on it. Not only doubles down on it, triples down on it. Throws this guy under the bus. Says it's horrible. It's completely awful. This is what we need to really be worried about. Writes articles and articles on it. Affirming, yes, we should have thrown this guy out. And look, there are a couple guys saying like, "Oh, you should have known about Dreher. You should have known about Dreher. Like he's done this before." And fair enough, he has. I looked into it. He has. He tried to cancel Moldbug. But if you don't know Dreher, and actually, you know what? Before we get into this, I'll give my personal history with Dreher. So I've actually met Dreher. What happened is that there's a book by Rod Dreher that was incredibly influential to a lot of people called The Benedict Option. Satirized, I guess, in title by the Eggs Benedict Option, with raw egg nationalist. And the thesis of the Benedict option was a huge red pill moment for me. And you can pick up, and I'm going to be oblique about this, but you can pick up the hidden red pill in this book, right? And his thesis is, look, American Christians are a declining demographic, and there's just less of us than everyone else. And so we can't keep acting like we're a majority anymore. We're going to have to play the game smart. We're going to have to build our own enclaves, build our own parallel institutions. We're going to have to play the game differently. You can't act like you're the moral majority when you're not the majority anymore. And of course, you can see the red pill smuggle in there. And fair enough. It's a good book. Maybe it's not a great book, but it's a book that I needed at the time. It pushed me along the road. And he writes a lot about being a dissident. He has another book, Live Not by Lies, that is not quite as good, but has some good stuff in it, where he essentially catalogs how dissidents have lived before, Christian dissidents specifically. So he talks about living behind the Iron Curtain. And he basically says, like, oh, it's coming one day. Like, be prepared for it in the West. And so this man has built his entire career on solidarity, on being a dissident, bucking the system and refusing to break under pressure. So fair enough, right? There's an argument in there. And of course, he's a little bit of a normie con. He writes for the American Conservative. But you know what? He doesn't live up to these values. And look, we're all hypocrites to one degree or another, but there were some cracks started to appear. So this guy writes constantly about loving your home. You got to stay where you are. His first 3 books, including his first one, which I think is called Crunchy Cons, I can't remember, which is about kind of conservative hippies, back to the land, regenerative farmer types. So all of it's about localism, big into Wendell Berry, stuff like that, which fair enough. Like, I like those guys. I'm sympathetic to localism. But you know what he does? Well, he moves to Hungary because he likes Hungary. Hungary's a good country. But he's not from Hungary. He's from a small town in the middle of nowhere. And he wrote all these books about how great localism was, but not for him, of course. Not for him. It's for other people. And he prefers other people's localism, their rich, vibrant culture. All right. So he moves to that. Fair enough. That's not that's not a damning thing. Well, then he has a divorce, a nasty divorce, shortly afterwards. Again, look, I get it. We all have problems. We all, sin. We all fall short. And look, I certainly agree that divorces happen, but if you've built your entire career on, on advocating for staying home and staying with your family, and you can do neither, well, that speaks to something, doesn't it? But then, when someone he's connected to starts to get targeted for controversial opinions, dissident opinions, not this kind of like soft, weak Claremont Institute, not to say anything against those guys, but only barely dissident. He cocks. He throws the guy under the bus. He savages him. He calls him a sinner. He calls him every name in the book. Just throws him out. Posts his name, everything. Just dumps more on him. And why? Because he's a catamite. Because he's just on his knees, ready to take it from the regime. Just ready to take it. And this brings me to several things I want to bring up. Which one, what do we do with traitors? People who sell out their own for personal gain. Because to me, I see that as a betrayal, right? I see that as you are inside the bounds of faith, right? Your Christian community, your local community even. What do? When someone from the out group comes in and says, look, they've done something, and you throw them out because you want approval from your enemies. For what? To be one of the good ones, one of the respectable conservatives? Well, you're not like those ones. You're not like the deplorables. You're throwing people off the boat so you can stay on while the water rises. These people are absolute scum, especially Dreyer, who has literally moved to Hungary, which essentially, and I realize that there's Magyars, there's different groups there, but it's essentially a white ethno-state. And look, you don't have to agree with what this guy wrote. You don't have to agree with how Hungary is. I certainly might not. I don't know. I don't know very much about Orban, except all the right people hate him. But nonetheless, you receive all of the benefits of these ideas. You want to LARP as a dissident. You want to do all this. You want to pretend you're at the cutting edge. But when the chips come down, what do? Anything to avoid real scrutiny, to avoid real hardship. I just have no respect for these people. And especially when it comes to doxing, taking someone's anonymously written, deliberately obscured. Like, I do not want this associated with me. This is disembodied ideas. You connect that with them. You destroy their life. And I'm talking about Dreyer because he's the biggest name who's attached himself to this. But there were Christians, not anonymous. There were Christians on Twitter who were specifically searching this out, who were going around before this was in any way proven, connecting his name to his post, looking for more, forwarding it to his job, trying to get his fundraising taken down. Yeah, Paul, you are getting me mad. I'm not even mad yet. And why do they do that? Well, they're one of the good ones. They invented this retarded heresy, which it's completely pants on head insane, called kinism. And despite being a Protestant, there are some Protestant tendencies that I can't stand. Sorry, I'm trying to retain my YouTube channel. I'll bring the temperature down a little bit. But this tendency to turn everything into a term, over intellectualize everything, and so they have this created heresy called kinism, which is this idea. It's basically turning the idea that race is real and that there's race and culture are in any way equivocal, turning that into a Christian heresy, which is not like that, not as a heresy. Irenaeus of Lyon, it's easy, Jay, to stop being Protestant. See, again, I can't. They're my people, for good or ill. And look, like, my church community is not full of people like this. At least I hope, right? Actually, I'm quite confident in that. But nonetheless, okay. What do these people do? They're looking for blood. And it's not even this guy. It's people he's connected to. But they couldn't get that guy. They couldn't get the guy who wrote Christian nationalism. So they cast around for anyone at hand. And this guy, maybe he was a little bit lazy. Maybe he missed the OPSEC, which, again, this is why you have to be stringent about OPSEC. Because if you're not, these people will kill you. They will murder you. Well, why did they do it? Well, I'll tell you why they did it. And you can tell who their God is. Because look, we have a specific way, in Scripture, right? When your brother is sinning, and fair enough, maybe you think that what this guy said was a sin, maybe you don't. I don't think it was. I think it was rash. I don't agree with it, but it's an idea. Okay, whatever. You disagree with him. He's not advocating for violence. It doesn't mean he's right. It doesn't mean he's correct. It doesn't mean you have to agree with him. But the way you're supposed to handle this, first you're supposed to go to him like a man and say, hey, look, as a Christian, as a brother, I think what you did is wrong. And here's the scripture to support it. Well, and then what do you do next? Well, you get a couple guys together, people who know him, not anonymous internet freaks. And you confront him again. Pretty normal, right? You're bringing part of the community into this. Like, hey, look, like, all of us have noticed this. This isn't right. Address this. This is a problem. And then, well, after that, what do? Well, you get the church involved in it. You talk to you talk to your priest, you talk to your bishop, you handle it that way. What you don't do is trumpet it from the mountaintops. This guy did something wrong. Punish him. Because, well, they don't care. They don't care about the apology. They don't care about doing things, quote unquote, the right way. They want a scalp. They want blood. They're out for your blood. And look, maybe now, early on in the radio Rwanda cycle, it's not literal. But really, how much difference does it make? Oh, I didn't hurt him physically. Oh, yeah, sure, he can't work a job anymore. Sure, he has 4 kids he can't feed anymore. But I didn't do it. I just showed the information. I just showed it to his job. Look, this is economic assassination. And honestly, that there's That's a fine line. That's a fine line. So look, there's this idea, and fair enough, maybe it's apocryphal. I think not. In the Old West, what would they do if you stole a horse? Well, they'd hang you. And why would they do that? It's not because a horse is really all that valuable in the emotional sense, but it's because without a horse, it's your mode of transportation. That's your livelihood. Without a horse, you starve to death. You're killing someone, if not directly, indirectly. Guys, just for people dropping in, I'm not saying the name. I've blocked it in chat. There will be no, mention of the name. I refuse to address it because it's just heaping coals on this guy's head, right? But this applies to any doxing, and especially among people who put themselves out as Christians. They put themselves out as, oh, I'm a good moral person. And look, I am a Christian. I have, I go to church, but I don't put myself out there as a Christian because one, I feel like I'm not a particularly good one. I realize there's some irony. I was just talking to Lambda about a Bible verse, and I feel like I did that pretty inexpertly. I'm a layman through and through. I try to learn more, but I don't want to be, I guess, responsible in that way. I don't want people to look at me and say, like, oh, well, why is this dickhead, acting like how he does? And there goes, look, there is no chance this is going to be monetized anyway, but there it goes anyway. And look, these people are traitors. They're taking their in-group, the people who agree with them. And when someone from the outside comes in and says, oh, they didn't even ask. And that's the worst part. They didn't even ask. They didn't know. These Christians looked for it because they want the kudos. They want the good boy points. They want the pat on the head for being one of the good Christians. Go, oh, I'm not like them. I take it so seriously. I take your values, outsider. I take your values, my enemy, so seriously that I'm going to police myself. And you see this all the time. They are so completely hook, line, and sinker bought into their enemy's premises that they will do anything. They will throw anyone to the wolves just to prove that they're not one of the bad ones. And I just have no respect for these people. They are moral cowards. Because look, right, if someone is apolitical, if someone is a normal person, when they get a call from, the ADL saying like, oh, you're supporting this guy, we're going to ruin your everything. And you got dozens of people banging at your heels. And you let someone go, you know what? I don't agree with it, but I at least understand it. But when these people who set themselves up, the heir to this tradition, the defenders of Western civilization, like people like Dreyer does, and then the enemies of that civilization say, give us one of your sons as a sacrifice, and Dreyer just throws him off the edge. Dreyer says, yeah, take him. And he wrote this article about, no enemies to his right. Like, oh, why are you coming back at me? Why are you coming back at me? And look, I'm the last one to say that everyone who's, that based and good are the same thing. Because look, there are plenty of people in our circle who do bad things. But when someone's crime isn't moral, really. Like, obviously, if someone to the right of me, murders someone, well, I can condemn that. Obviously, I'm not an ideologue. Don't fall into that trap. But when someone is being tried for essentially a political crime, someone's being brought up like a Soviet commissar and essentially shot in the back of the head from a financial perspective, at least for now, because they won't toe the party line. And again, I don't even know if I agree with this guy. I've read some of what he says, and some of it makes sense to me, some of it doesn't. That doesn't really matter. But you throw them off the edge for a political crime, for an opinion. You've got to realize all you've done is move yourself up one spot on the kill list because these people are ravenous. You will never be good enough. The only way you can be good enough is by converting, by flopping over. And then even then, it's just a matter of time. These people are the Girondists, and they will be treated as such, both by their erstwhile allies and by the history to come. And this obsession the right has with policing itself, it just shows you how unserious these people are. They're so cucked. They're so buck broken that they are doing their enemy's work for them. And they try to present themselves like Dreyer's, oh, I'm a dissident. I'm really fighting the system, guys. Well, how are you doing that? Well, I've got to, we got to enforce our moral standards. We wouldn't want anyone untowards in our movement. Well, look at this. Really. And this is why. This is that ratcheting effect. What was morally untoward 10 years ago? Like, oh, well, you can think of the words that you could say 30 years ago. You couldn't say 20. Well, what are the things that are morally untoward now that were perfectly fine 10 years ago? Okay, extrapolate that line into the future. And this is how you see the eternal cucking of the American right-wing movement, of conservative Inc. And look, you see it on both ends. And this is the thing that drives me nuts, is that there's kind of two ends. There's the leading end, the point of the spear, and then the hook on the back. That's the last available acceptable point. And the thing that drives me nuts is that there's the Dreyer, there's these snakes in the grass Christians who are seeking this out, who are desiring it, who are looking for their own to root out, root and branch, to find the unbeliever, quote unquote, to tear them, to take a scalp, to get the validation from finding one of the bad ones, from finding their records, from finding the hidden witch. But then on the other end, there's people like David French. And I hate David French. I hate David French like you wouldn't believe. But I'm fascinated by David French. And I'll tell you why. Because David French is the embodiment of the left is one, and why that's actually a good thing. That's his whole stick. The conservative case for insert left-wing cultural view. And these two processes form the acceptable Overton window of conservative TM thought. On the front end, you have the Dinesh D'Souza types, the rooting out of, the wrong thing, the rooting out of, those who don't bow to the conservative, or to the state religion. Seeking out those people, destroying them, pulling them apart, taking their scalp so you can get the points for it. You can take the social cachet. That's the front end, the leading end of it. And then on the back end, you have the hook. The thing that once that grabs you, you can't go any far past that. If you've ever gone fishing before, you know exactly what I mean. That once the hook is over you, well, you can't back off. You have to go through. And that hook, that keeps you there. And that hook is David French. Well, why is this actually a conservative victory? And look, one of the things that I've been mulling over, and I still may do, is write a book targeted at the normie con. It'd be a little bit tepid for these circles, but about MLK. And give me a second. I opened a beer at the start of the stream, but I got too fired up, and I'll need to take a sip. Sorry, not trying to turn this into an ASMR stream. But anyway, where was I? And MLK is the perfect example of this. Because look, when he first came out, he was a radical. And look, maybe he was the regime's radical, but if you read, the right wing of that era, if you read what actually happened, if you read his sermons, if you read his theological work, you just look at the number, the deaths, the destruction that followed him around. This man was a radical. Well, what happens? David French's come along. They say, well, actually, it's a good thing. Well, if we just accept this, we bring it into our system. Well, it can be ours. This cultural victory can be ours. We can use the weapon they used against us. This is the logic behind the lefts or the real racists. It's like, oh, well, if we just accept their premises, we can turn it around back on them. That's not how this works, is it? And look, we all know that's how this works. We all know that you can't just accept their premises. But these are two linked behaviors. And David French really is the ultimate regime slave. Recently, there was an act called I believe it was called the Respect for Marriage Act, essentially codifying butt marriage into law, formally recognizing it. And David French wrote an article at The Atlantic called "Pluralism Has Life in It Yet." basically saying, well, this is actually good for us. This is the win for us. Well, because you see it enshrines religious freedom. Well, of course, we made a deal, we made a compromise, and it'll work out great for us because it's always worked out great. And he even says this line, which I think is very revealing. He's like, look, you don't need to be alarmed. You don't need to be freaked out that you'll ever be treated like a white supremacist or something. We'll never go down that we'll never use that tool on you again. And you know that's a lie. You know that's a lie because that's not how this works. If you give these people an inch, they'll take a mile. And I was going to read this article. I still might later, but I'm on a roll. I don't feel like reading it yet. I feel like railing at you people who for some reason decided to listen to some Zoomer talk about, decrepit Gen X conservatives. But it's this take that, eternally, accepting the left's victories from 10 years ago. Just eternally just accepting your losses and rationalizing them, eternally rationalizing them. Because if you go outside that box, well, you lose your respectability. You don't get invited to parties anymore. Well, you're one of the bad conservatives. And look, I'm no Trump guy. I am no Trump guy by any means, but you saw how these conservatives reacted. You saw how they reacted when someone was outside the box. That's completely outside the moral constraints. We can't allow that. And I just have no respect for these people because they are not moralists. They're not moralists. They do not care about acting in a moral action. What they do is they care about serving their masters. And you see that in how they act. You see that in what they value. And honestly, I have more disdain for these people because they're not even good Machiavellians. Look, if you're a Machiavellian, if all you care about is power, if you just want to win, where do you go? You go to the Democratic Party, of course, because it's the side that wins. It's the side that wins. And so why do you go into the Republican Party? Because you're a worse version of it. You couldn't get in the club. And look, I don't mean to say that these men have no, conservative, inclinations. I maybe there's some kind of soul in there. But they've been corrupted by the most minor shade of influence. It's not like these guys are huge shot callers. It's not like these guys are massively selling authors. It's not like these guys have talk shows late at night. Because at least then you can kind of understand it, right? Like Satan showed Christ the whole world, in his dominion. But these people turned over. These people sold out their own. They betrayed their own, and for what? A crumb of relevance. Oh, okay, great, David French. You're the token conservative who writes at The Atlantic. I'm sure the several hundred people that read your article, half of which won't finish it, half of which just automatically hate you already, and maybe a quarter of which actually consider what you've read. Maybe, if that. And you sold out your patrimony. You sold out your civilization for what? For that. For that and a few cocktail parties. These people are so terrified of their enemies that they do their work for them. And look, I saw someone referencing this in chat before, that in the ancient world, traitors were viewed as the lowest of the low. The bottom of hell, according to Dante, right? Well, there are the traitors. And who does Satan have in his mouth? Satan, the ultimate traitor. Well, he's got Judas in his mouth and he's chewing him. And I think that tells you how, people of Dante's era saw traitors, in the mouth of Satan. But the last thing I want to address, the last thing I want to kind of tie this up in is how we look at the concept of forgiveness, right? Because look, as Christians, right, we talk a lot about forgiveness. We're supposed to. And fair enough. But that's been something that's been weaponized against us. And there's this ritual, you see it after any, horrifying attack. Sometimes a, should we say a client of the state, one of a member of the Rainbow Coalition will murder, a red stater. And almost immediately, either that person or someone connected to it or, a relevant church leader. So like, well, of course I forgive them. We don't hate them. We don't accept the real evil, which is the negative effects of this, on them or on their community. And look, certainly, forgiveness is important. But one, forgiveness has to be asked for. Two, well, there's something ghastly about doing it while the bodies are still warm. And three, justice and forgiveness are not mutually exclusive. That there's this idea that the blood of the innocent cry out for justice. That we don't I see that retracted message, Vingle. You don't just punish people, to hurt them. You don't punish people, because you get off on it. You punish people because it's what they deserve. It's justice. It's what will make things right. And again, I'm not trying to Fed post here. I don't go give these people what they want, which is negative attention. Rabid right wingers, jumping all over and breathing down their necks. Don't give them that. Don't give them that, because that's what they want. You're giving them power, and that's the last thing we need to do. But there does need to be a sense of justice for this, and remember these people. When someone shows you who they are, to quote my odd and eccentric boss, don't forget it. Don't forget when someone shows you who they are. And when someone shows you that they will sell out their friends for a crumb of relevance, for a crumb of power, don't forget that. And also don't forget traditionally how those people were treated, because that's the amount of moral disdain you should have towards these spiritual syphilitics, towards these people who are spreading disease wherever they go. And another important thing about the concept of forgiveness is that there really is something to the fact that hatred can poison you. So in all of this anger, which is productive, I'm trying to prove a point to you. I'm not trying to just be angry for views. For the 64 people who are watching, I'm not, dancing around like a monkey just to entertain you guys. Although I hope it's, at least moderately worth your time. But don't let this poison you. Don't let them live in your head rent free. But as far as I'm considered, Dreyer's dead to me. This man is a traitor. I will henceforth refer to him as the traitor, because that's how I view him. And look, I'm not going to deny that the traitor taught me some things. He showed me some ideas that maybe he got from somewhere else. But you know what? Fair enough. I can't deny that. But at this point, he's a traitor. He's shown where his allegiances lie. And his allegiances lie with the people that want to destroy you. To paraphrase Sam Hyde, not Sam Fried. They want to see you dead. They want your children castrated, and they think it's funny. And Dreyer may mouth his own opinions that are different. French may say that he's a conservative Christian that supports, traditional marriage. But look at how they act. Look at who they align themselves with. They align themselves with the people that hate you. And especially in the case of Dreher, because he benefits from all of the radical right-wing ideas that he just can't countenance. He benefits from those. He lives, essentially in a post-liberal ethno-state. But of course, if anyone says that at home, if anyone advocates for that here, which fair enough, I don't advocate for those here for a variety of reasons, Susan. Even if you benefit from those, well, you can't say it, of course. That would be morally untoward. And the analogy I think of is these people are building a wall to stop a flood with the bricks their enemies hand them. They're literally using their enemies' arguments to condemn their friends, And much like every generation of these conservatives, that wall will collapse. It is already collapsing. But the very tools they use will be used against them. And I cannot wait. Because either they have two paths. Either they will stay firm where they are and then they will be eaten. Then they will be cast out. The exact same fate they pushed on others. Or they'll continue to do what they've always done. And they'll cuck. And the eternal cuck. Always, whatever you want. Whatever you want. Take my wife. Take my kids. Take my son. Whatever you want. As long as I can still come to the party. As long as I'm still one of the good ones. And look, I'm not even saying that you have to agree with everyone. But just shut the hell up. Don't dogpile them. You don't have to like them. You don't have to agree with them. But shut the hell up. And look, there are two categories of crimes here. I'd say there's political and then there's moral. All right, fair enough. If I murder someone, you all have my written permission to disavow. But in disavowing, you accept their moral framing. And so if you agree on that moral framing, if you agree murder is wrong, well then fair enough, disavow. But if you don't, you've just explicitly, or implicitly rather, agreed with their moral framing. And this is the point of Dreyer's most recent book, Live Not by Lies. He literally brings up the struggle sessions. He literally brings up, being forced to sign, being forced to tread on the fumie, being forced to deny, your brothers, disavow your family. He says that's a grave moral failing because that implants a seed of doubt, a seed of corruption inside of you. And that's the very point, the quote that he takes from Solzhenitsyn, live not by lies. And his point is, don't lie to appease the regime. And then what does he do? What does he do not 2 years later? From the comfort of a Budapest hotel after leaving his wife. Well, what does he do? He accepts his enemy's moral framing. He doesn't. He turns over and takes it. And not even just for him. Because look, if he was apologizing for his own actions, giving up something that actually mattered to him, that would be noble. But what is he doing? He is sacrificing someone else's life for his own gain, for his own personal satisfaction, for his own personal status. And that is low. And that should be viewed as low. And maybe, you know what? Maybe these guys can turn around. Maybe if they respond to the based altar call and, say like, oh, I was wrong. Fair enough. We can talk about it then. But I'm remembering this. Well, anyway, guys, I'll stick around for a little bit. I might start reading the French article, but I think that's 40 minutes of me wildly yelling into the microphone. And I should also say, do not contact these people. Do not harass them. Just don't engage. Because if you do that, you give them what they want. They want crazed right-wingers to be able to retweet. They want crazed, quote-unquote, right-wingers to be able to morally justify them. Don't give them that moral victory. All right. We got Paul W. Hall for $10. Thank you very much, by the way. Keep calling things as you see. These people are more so the enemy than anyone else. I completely agree. I completely agree. All right. So you know what? I'm going to read this Atlantic article. And I want to make sure first I can read the whole thing. Awesome. I can. So I'm actually going to read a pair of articles. The first one is The Pluralism Has Life in It Yet. And then the second one, which is a response to that, he wrote in the Dispatch, an open letter to those who think I've lost my Christian faith. I'll be able to bring the first one up on stream, but the second one is behind a paywall, so I'm going to have to read it off of my mobile phone. Which, by the way, if you guys want to read ads or articles behind paywalls, the mobile version of Brave has a reader mode, which will enable you to bypass these. And again, I actually don't know very much about the Respect for Marriage Act. That's what it's called. I should have said that. All right. Let me share the screen. Window. You can tell I'm incredibly professional at this. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that there isn't a way that you guys have to see the stream, because that's probably kind of annoying. All right. Good, we got that worked out. Pluralism has life in it yet. I'm going to need to take a drink before we get started on this. The Respect for Marriage Act and harmony between religious liberty. And he uses the full acronym. My point exactly. And LGBTQ rights by David French. It's been called the oral argument that cost Democrats the presidency. On April 28, 2015, Solicitor Italian Jr. stood up in the Supreme Court and argued that the court should recognize a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. During the argument, Justice Samuel Alito asked him a question that voiced concerns of millions of people of faith. Here was the key exchange. Alito: well, in the Bob Jones case, the court has held that a college was not entitled to tax-exempt status if it opposed interracial marriage or interracial dating. So should the same apply to a university or college if it opposed same-sex marriage? Italian: I don't think I can answer that question without knowing more specifics, but it's certainly going to be an issue. I don't deny that, Justice Alito. It's going to be an issue. With that response, the Italian confirmed a growing sense of alarm in theologically conservative Christian circles. If they continued to maintain that marriage is a union between a man and a woman, would they be treated as bigots, as the equivalent of white supremacists? Undoubtedly. That is coming for us. I'm not saying this to say get in your bunker, the Reds are coming. But look at the scoreboard. This is the way it's going. And this is what Dreyer himself made the argument that this was happening. He said this was coming. He wrote a book about how this is coming. And look, I realize these are different people, but they essentially operate on the same premises. They're both willing at different rates, at different points, but in the same direction to bend towards their enemies. Never forget that. Never forget that these people have let you down. They are allowing this to happen. They are tacitly allowing this to happen. Ever since a 1983 case called Bob Jones University v. United States, an 8-1 decision, the IRS has had the power to strip tax exemption from educational institutions, including religious schools, that enact racist policies. The government, the court said, has a fundamental overriding interest in eradicating racial discrimination in education. This is what's coming, really. And I think that there's an episode that Pete did with a pastor, I can't remember, a while back. It's a good one, though. And his pastor essentially talks about what happened, with Zionism, the Schofield Bible and other things, especially in American, low church Protestantism, evangelicals, right? The George Bush types. And he basically says that there was a carrot and stick. And the stick was tax-exempt status. Now, in the U.S., for those who aren't familiar, churches don't have to pay tax. Which for an organization that big would be a lot of money. It could be up as much as a third of, their money could go to that, which is huge. For organizations that, are charitable and, rely on donations, that matters a lot with big overheads. Giant buildings have to heat, clean, maintain. And what they basically did is they used this like a stick to beat anyone who was either racist. And we all know that what was racist in the minds of those, who went along with this in the 60s has almost no bearing on what is quote unquote racist now. And if you think for a minute the same thing won't happen with sexuality, you're a moron. Or your name is David French. I repeat myself. And I think that we should expect that as this kind of banana republic continues on, that the weapons of the state will be used to beat their ideological enemies more and more. The proper answer to Alito's question should have been, no, it will not be an issue, Alito. Government does not view the traditional teachings of the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and the vast majority of Protestant churches to be equivalent to white supremacy. And the government has had a fundamental and overriding interest in protecting the free exercise of religion. One, citation needed. Quite literally, it is. This is the biggest cope I've ever seen. And also, Even if that is the case, why do you assume that will continue to be the case? This is complete and total copium. That's why if there's a thumbnail of an early stream where I think I talked to Ace on this, where I photoshopped David French huffing out of the copium mask. And it's almost as if he imagines that we live in the world of 2005, forever. He wakes up every day and it's January 1st, 2005. We got the moral majority. The government agrees with us nominally. It's fine. You can be a conservative Christian, quote unquote, and have nothing wrong with it. And he says that. Again, citation needed. But he said it. Who are you to disagree? Because of the Italians' response when same-sex marriage advocates have asked opponents, what does my marriage have to do with your life? There's been an obvious answer from people of faith. Changing the law could strip me of my religious freedom, could destroy the school where I educate my kids, and it could damage the institutions that represent and advance my deepest beliefs and core values. This did not have to be the outcome of recognizing same-sex marriage, and so far it has not been. So far has not been the outcome of recognizing same-sex marriage. Thanks to more than a decade of religious freedom victories at the Supreme Court, people of faith enjoy more religious freedom from government suppression than at any time in the nation's history. This is what I mean. I cannot fathom the sheer amount of copium dependency this man operates with. I just can't understand it. Well, of course, look, the baker in Colorado, he won his case. It doesn't matter that he's harassed consistently. It doesn't matter that he's been legal warfare has been, that's redundant. Legal warfare has been waged against him since that decision. This man has essentially been unable to operate a normal business. He's been harassed out of the workplace. His name is ruined. But it's all legal, of course. Just because the government did it or didn't do it, well, it's fine. It doesn't matter if everyone else harasses him. It doesn't matter if this man had his life ruined, but because the government didn't do it. This is the most free we've ever been. I mean, look, I realize this might be a stupid question, but I mean, how free do you guys feel? I had a tweet, and this was one of the first tweets that kind of blew up for me. And blew up as a relative term, right? Because it's a small Twitter account. Basically, retweeting a quote from this article, dunking on David French. He put that quote out there on Twitter. And my point was look, Christianity is not the state religion anymore. And look, I can't think of a time in my life. I can't think of a time in my parents' lives. Maybe in my grandparents' lives, but even then, that would be outside the norm. Where violating Christian precepts could get you fired. But I can think of a whole lot of time, basically my entire life, my parents' entire life, and most of my grandparents as well, where violating this new state religion, where that could get me thrown out, that could get me treated as a white supremacist. Maybe either for literal white supremacy or maybe just for things that were almost as bad. Because you got to understand, the right will dob you out and the left will crush you. The right will crush you too if they have the chance with their modicum of power. At the same time, thanks to Oberfell v. Hodges and Bostock versus Clayton County, the latter of which held that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects Americans from employment discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, alphabet Americans now enjoy more rights to form their own family and greater protection from workplace discrimination than any other time in American history. It's how pluralism is supposed to work. It's possible for people with profoundly different worldviews to enjoy both individual liberty and freedom from workplace discrimination. Title VII also protects people of faith from discrimination. Because the rules are always applied fairly, right? It's always the same for people on both sides of the aisle. We know that. And that's how it will always be. Because that's what it says, of course. And we all know that if it's in a document, well, of course it has to hold. Can you think of one time ever the law has been ignored or interpreted differently from how it was originally meant to? Can you think of one document? I mean, I, for one, can't. We wrote it down on a piece of paper, therefore it's true. Also, this is lest you doubt that, adopting this virtue of pluralism, adopting your enemy's frame from 30 years ago, You see it in this exact argument. He's making the argument that a liberal would in 1990, but he's just swallowed it up, or he's just swallowed it and spit it back up, in a weaker form that applies less, but signals his ultimate accession to this system of values. But if there's an oral argument that haunts conservative people of faith, POF, there's a court opinion that haunts LGBTQ Americans. In Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, Thomas wrote a concurring opinion calling on the court to reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Obergefell. Based. Even though Alito's majority opinion explicitly stated nothing in this opinion should be understood to cast doubt on precedents that do not concern abortion, Thomas's concurrence set an understandable shudder through the alphabet community. Could Obergefell fall? That is an irritating sentence. Could the relationship people had built their lives around suddenly be stripped of legal recognition? My own assessment of legal precedents lead me to the conclusion that neither the liberty of religious organizations nor Obergefell faces acute legal threat. There is no sign the majority of the court is set to roll back religious liberty, and the majority has explicitly refused to cast doubt on Obergefell. There are very strong reasons to believe the court won't touch Obergefell, including the reliance of millions of Americans on the court ruling. At the same time, however, I understand the concerns in both directions. Of course you do. In a functional Congress, it would be an issue ripe for compromise, for a legislative solution that eases the worst fears of competing constituencies. And that brings me to the Senate version of the Respect for Marriage Act. On Wednesday, a bipartisan coalition of senators, 50 Democrat, 12 R, voted to block a filibuster of legislation that both protects same-sex marriage if Obergefell falls and contains, religious freedom protections for religious dissenters, including explicit protection for tax exemption. The bill doesn't give either side everything, but it still contains a crucial provision that can comfort almost everyone. First, it states that no person acting under color of state law can deny full faith and credit to any public act, record, and judicial proceeding of any other state pertaining to a marriage between two individuals on the basis of sex, blah, 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 blah. Plain English, it means if your marriage was legal in the states where you're married, government officials from another state can't refuse to recognize the validity. And what of religious freedom? The bill does two important things. First, it declares that nothing in this act or any other amendment made by this act shall be construed to diminish or abrogate a religious liberty or conscious protection otherwise available to an individual organization under the Constitution of the United States or federal law. This is an important provision and distinctly different from the Democratic approach to the Equality Act, which limited the reach of Religious Freedom Restoration Act. In other words, the bill explicitly diminished religious freedom protections under federal law. The Respect for Marriage Act does no such thing. But the bill goes even further. A key provision deals explicitly with tax exemptions, blah, 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 blah. Basically, it says that you can't, revoke tax exemption. Again, we'll see how that goes. I do not believe this. This man should know much better. The magic of the American Republic is that it can create space for people who possess deeply different worldviews to live together, work together, and thrive together, even though they stay true to their different religious faiths and moral convictions. The Senate's Respect for Marriage Act doesn't solve every issue in American culture war, but it's still a bipartisan step in the right direction. It demonstrates that compromise still works and pluralism has life in it yet. Well, does it? Because we see what happens. We see what happens. When someone falls outside of these lines. Or are they afforded tolerance? I guess they are, aren't they? It's all fine. You guys can tell I'm mad. I'm getting overly emotional about this, but this is pure copium. This is the same, well, I follow the rules, so you guys have to. And these people are going to get rolled. They're going to get rolled. And he has another article about this, talking about how, he got attacked, how he got attacked, how people, searched him out and harassed him. You're familiar with it, right? You've heard the song and dance. Just let me pull this up because I do want to read this. I'll skim it. I don't want to bore you guys. I think that Dave is going live soon to discuss a similar issue. It's funny. Dave and I are on a 2-week streak of thinking of almost the exact same topic, which I take as a compliment. At least there's something in common between us. And Dave is a huge influence on mine. If you guys want, I might spend, at least 15 or 20 minutes at the end answering questions. If you guys want to either, drop super chats or just put it in the Spurg chat, I'll try to get to those. Sorry, I know listening to me type is great podcasting. All right, let me pull this up. I refuse to give these people any money. No, well, darn it. I can't get behind that even on Brave. But I'll read the first part I can. This is funny. The Parable of David French, someone wrote. And he says, he goes on, he's like, oh, well, I'm being attacked for my truly held, opinions. He goes on to whine that, like, oh, I'm examining the truth. Sure you are. Sure you are. Sure you are. Just admitting your alleged opposition's, right at every turn. It's fine, guys, because they said they'd leave us alone. Just like they said they'd leave us alone for years. Really, to draw this to a conclusion that these people are snakes. Don't forget it. They're traitors. Should be regarded as such. And don't let the rage, don't let the hate consume you. And if these people repent, then fair enough, forgive them. That repentance doesn't get you out of punishment, but it's the right thing to do, and we hope for it, and it closes the wound. But you know what? I don't think they're going to. These people, they use your words, they use your labels, but they're not you. They're skinwalkers. And look, that idea, right, of the uncanny valley, of wait, he looks like a friend, but not quite. That's how you need to look at these people. Look at these people like synths from Fallout 4. Infiltrators set among you. And look, like when we think of the danger, it's easy to think of the blue-haired, feminist type. Both middle fingers up in the air, shrieking about revolution now. But who's going to knife you in the back? Who's going to put you out on the street? It's not her. I mean, she might be involved, right? But it's people like this. So keep your distance, guys. Anyway, that's going to draw the monologue of this to a conclusion. I'm happy to answer questions if you guys want to get into chat. And you know what? If nothing comes up over the next couple minutes, I'm happy to wrap things up. I can go as long as you guys want, but if there's no interest, obviously, I'm not going to just hold you guys hostage. Again, Paul, thank you for the super chat. I really do appreciate it. Reading through mentions. I think I addressed all my direct mentions. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything in chat, so I might just wrap out the hour. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go for a little bit longer because I have more beer to drink. Yeah, I will say, it's an issue I've been thinking about for a long time. And it's rare for me to get so heated about stuff like this because I try to stay fairly detached through a lot of it. I tend to take the younger approach of just like, oh, stay above it all. Oh, Drew Perot for $4.99. Thank you, Mr. Burden. I appreciate it. Again, when I'm asking for questions, I'm not asking for money, but I do appreciate it. Again, it can even be asinine. Like, look, I got 2/3 of a PBR to go through, and it would be degenerate if I just chuck the whole thing and go to bed. Well, anyway, I guess there isn't much happening. So, what am I drinking? I'm drinking a PBR, which I ended up with a large collection of them after a friend's birthday party. And I hate to say it, PBR is quite good. I have somewhat plebeian taste in beer. I know the cool, the hipster thing is IPAs, but I mean, the most fancy beer I drink is Belgians. I really just like Belgian beer. There's a top 3 beers. Okay. I quite like Allagash, which is it's a local beer out of Maine, but it's made in the American style. It's quite good. That's number 1. Uh, then there is, why can't I think of it off the top of my head? Then there's one which is called it just goes by Triple, which is like a kind of a spiced, technically like Belgian beer that I quite like. And then honestly, I don't drink that much beer that often. Sorry, I realize this is riveting content, but honestly, I'm probably gonna have to say PBR for number 3. I just like how it tastes, bros. It tastes like toast. It's good. PBR sucks. Try Estinoke. I don't know what that is. I'm stuck. That's what it is. It's I'm stuck. I don't know why I can't pronounce. See if I've actually tried this before. I have not tried that. Icelandic white. That actually sounds quite interesting. I tend to like white ale, and I think Iceland is a fascinating country. I don't fully understand it. Estinok? Sorry, Vingle. I cannot speak your bizarre Viking languages. I actually can barely speak English. Cringe Walker for $2. America needs its own Dante's Inferno text. I fully agree. I think there's a lot in Dante. Dante is one of those writers that I think you have to be. He is best read if you're taught him. I was thankfully taught him in school, and that was extremely helpful because just reading it, raw, so to speak, there's like so much. There's just so much allusion and so much depth to the text. You do just completely lose it. Paul W. Hall, I've heard every bottle or can of PBR tastes different. Is this true? I could be convinced. I think it tastes different depending on which size you get it in, which might just be my perception of it. All right. Kevin Yolantis Scott Productions. Why do you think these conservatives who are similar to French believe what they do? Do you think they're at least being truthful with their beliefs? So yes and no. I think that for a lot of them, and I've met people like this, like my fiance's grandparents, which I call them the 85-year-old communists, the 85-year-old gay communists, because that's essentially what they've become. That I think a lot of people became Christian and were kind of raised in culturally Christian conservative circles at a time in which that was like a respectable and moral thing to be. And that's what all the upright people were, kind of like the Eisenhower Republican types. And so they were never particularly right-wing, so to say. They were more just kind of temperamentally conservative. Right, so I'd consider temperamental conservatives the kind of people who are like, well, I don't really want anything to change. I just want things to keep the same, status quo types. That they are really just conservative people in their daily lives. And so as the status quo changes, as what is respectable changes, well, they go with it. And then at a great distance, you can really see, all this way far, you can see how much they've changed over time. So that's part of it. And I do think that there is, with people like French, it's hard for me to believe that he really believes it. I do think there is a type of person who really wants conservatism to work, who wants to stick to their principles, who wants to stick to the laws it's written, who wants to be a fiscal conservative. And there's a certain part of it that I think that idea of being a beautiful loser, someone who will lose but be the truest version of themselves. I think that's part of it too, and I don't want to overly psychologize it, but to me, I think that's a big part of it. It's funny, someone in my Telegram posted, let me see who it was. I think it was it Cody Browning, who's been in chat on and off? I'll see what he said because it was quite funny. It was Yevsey, who I was speaking to the other day in chat. He's a good guy. But he said he says Jay Burden, try not to stream on Tuesday challenge. Literally impossible. Or try not to forget that Dave streams on Tuesday night. Literally impossible. Yeah, I think you're right. For some reason, despite liking Dave's content a lot, I almost never catch it live, and so I think that I've overlapped with his stream probably half a dozen times at this point. Well, anyway, guys, I realize that Dave is going live, and I'm most of the way through this beer, and I don't want to keep you guys too long. So I consider this kind of a last call for questions, and then after that, I'll probably wrap things up. Yeah, Thursday is DR Day, Volpes. It is. I don't know what it is, but I can't really do much on Fridays again because I normally hang out with people. But Tuesdays and Thursdays are the days I would like to, but it seems like so would everyone else. I was just on, and you should check this out. I was just on Lambda's channel. I'll drop a link to that in the chat. So I was on his channel to discuss Proverbs 31, which is the one about women. And I think it went quite well. Lambda is an absolute saint, and I am a shuffling troglodyte when it comes to theology. I feel like it went pretty well. I think that I, as I often do, tend to hyper politicize it. Huh. Oh, that's odd. This new YouTube update is ass. This is the worst. Can't even find my own version of the stream. So I'll drop that. Lovely W Proverbs. Watch it, my girlfriend. Aldi stocks a Belgian wheat ale called White Tide. There's an Aldi close to me. Although if you're in Australia, actually no, you're not in Australia. I will give that a shot because I am both incredibly cheap and a fan of Belgians. So thank you for that. I will take that with. I will take that. All right. Sorry, I am just stumbling around StreamYards, trying to get this to work. All right. I'm glad, Bullfrog, that you enjoyed it with your girlfriend. And again, thank you, Drew, for the $5. Again, you don't have to pay me, but I do appreciate it. What prospects do you see for Christian nationalism between mainline Protestants and Catholics? I am none convinced. I think Christian nationalism is, despite defending this guy who's involved in it, I don't think it's a particularly good idea. I don't really see it working. The mainline Protestant churches are pretty much all that are dead. There's almost nothing left to them. It's pretty much just the evangelicals. And evangelicals and Catholics, I think, agree on a lot. But if you look at where they're distributed, there's not a lot of overlap at all. They're pretty much in exclusive areas of the country. So maybe there could be kind of push towards the same direction. But to me, it seems like a losing proposition. Christian nationalism has been tried a number of times. I think that anything in America will wear the skin of both American nationalism and Christianity. But I'm thoroughly unconvinced by this program. They're nice guys. I wish them all the best, but I'm not convinced at all. Okay. All right, let me look at this. Strange question. Has anyone else in the States noticed a shortage of radishes in supermarkets? I actually have, and that's because my fiance made something that involved radishes relatively recently and was complaining she couldn't find any good ones. So I agree. All right. How can any man convince themselves that losing with honor is winning? How can they sleep at night after giving up your entire civilization? Well, to be honest, because there is a nobility in losing with honor, right? That idea of, the sculpture of the defeated Gaul, someone who is kind of noble in defeat, they've fought a good fight. But there's a difference between that and doing what these guys do, which is cuck. Like there's a certain part of it that if David French was on the front lines, fighting, and he was at the end, and he lost, but he tried his hardest. You got to respect that. But that's not what they're doing. I don't know how they can sleep at night, especially calling themselves defenders of their culture and living like this. To me, I don't understand it. Catamite, what a word, sir. I actually stole that from Charles Haywood of the Worthy House, who I will say, to plug my own content, is coming on my channel most possibly next week. So it'll be a big guest for me. I've also got, if I can talk about this, I've got Mr. Patriarch coming on tomorrow. that will be a pre-recorded episode because he lives in Alaska and time is weird. So he's been out of the scene for a while, but I'm glad to have him back because he's been an influence on me, and I think we'd have a fun time talking. And we'll probably actually talk about South Africa because I'm fascinated with South Africa, and also marriage because he is a married man. Also, I have an episode with Thomas coming out. That'll probably come out Friday night. And then down the pipe, we got some other people which I can't really, address on. But you know what? Is Haywood seriously coming on the show? Yeah, he is. We were going back and forth on Twitter, but he got back to me in DMs really quickly and was like, "Yeah, reach out, email me." So I sent him an email after work today, and he didn't get back. Obviously, he's a guy with real world responsibilities. He's got kids and stuff, so I'm not going to blame him for that. Cringe Walker writing this off on his. Oh no, is it Cringe Walker? No, sorry, it's Lube Templar, who writes it off on his taxes. Who knows? Maybe they're on whatever they have. Jordan B. Peterstein, the chemical castratos are very bendable. That was a little. All right, that kind of made me laugh. That was funny. He was spurging out. It's funny. I know, Cringe Walker, that's the joke. I was just trying to shield you from the IRS. Yeah, that is the actual Cringe Walker. Anyway, this has actually been a few weeks where I've had to kind of eat crow on a number of figures. So I was influenced by Peterson and the Trader at the same time. They were kind of both pushing me down the path. And I kind of, at both of them, had to fully disavow, Cringe Walker, or not Cringe Walker. I just can't read your name and talk. You're literally living in my head rent free. No. But when Peterson came out and basically, went back on his, soapbox about ending internet anonymity, spurging out at, people making fun of him on Twitter, and the stuff with the only democracy in the Middle East, I was finally like, all right, I cut ties with this man. For whatever he did for me, for however far he got me, I'm out. And Andre are kind of back to back, and so to a certain degree, I kind of feel like all of my heroes, all of my like intellectual, I guess like focal points of like 2019 are kind of dead and gone. And same thing with Douglas Murray. That just happened a while ago. And so to me, at least, like I kind of feel like I've eaten crow, and yeah, it's good to remember because I speak with anger because I did kind of trust, quote unquote, these guys. Well, anyway, guys, thank you for being as generous as you were. I really do appreciate it. Every little bit helps. I pretty much, at least for now, I'm monetized, and so that I can pretty much cover all the costs of the channel. But I do appreciate every little bit. With a wedding coming up, right? There's lots of expenses, and I do appreciate it. Drew Perot, sad about Peterson. Yeah, I am too. I am too. Like myself and a lot of other guys, younger Zoomers, like he did a lot for us. And then it's easy to look back on it now and be like, oh, you should have known, there were warning signs, or, oh, like, didn't you have a dad? All right, fair enough, maybe, but I think he's a gateway for a lot of us, myself and it sounds like you and Matt, the Prudentialist. Yeah, even Bullfrog, he's the same thing. Aranis, I can't read that out. But I agree. I fully agree with that. Again, I like my YouTube channel, but that made me laugh. So kudos from me. My fiance will often say someone is spiritually, but not literally homosexual, as an insult. I think that applies in both cases, it is in both cases, of course. All right, guys. Well, anyway, you should all head over to Dave, the distributist. He's been going for about 10 or 15 minutes. I do need to head out, but I appreciate you guys turning out. It was a good stream. For a solo one, I feel like I put a lot out there. And anyway, guys, keep your head up. The light can't last forever. Good night.